The day my son slid those papers across my kitchen table, the afternoon sun was coming in low through the blinds, catching on the steam from my coffee mug and turning it into a little ghost between us, and he said, "Sign, Mom. It's just to help with taxes," like he was asking me to initial a birthday card instead of signing away the roof over my head. If you've ever had someone you love say something like that in that calm, practiced voice, you might guess that my heart started to tap a little warning against my ribs even before I really understood why. I was 67 that fall, a widow of 10 years, living alone in the same small beige-sided house in Ohio where we'd raised our kids, and my blue ceramic mug sat between us the way it always did at 3 in the afternoon, the handle worn smooth where my thumb rested. The words, "World's Best Mom," faded to a ghost of themselves from hundreds of trips through the dishwasher. Mark had his suit jacket on, even though he knew I kept the thermostat at 68 to save on gas, and his phone lay face down by his elbow, buzzing every few minutes against the table. "It's just some paperwork," he said, tapping where a little yellow sticky note flagged the signature line. And I remember noticing, of all things, the faint smell of his cologne, that same sporty-smelling stuff he'd started wearing in high school when he wanted to impress girls. Only now it was sharper, more expensive, like everything about him these days. I looked at his face, my boy's face that I knew as well as my own, and watched how his eyes didn't quite meet mine, and a quiet thought drifted through my mind like that steam from my mug. Since when did my own kitchen feel like somebody else's office? Before any of this, that kitchen had been noisy and sticky and full of life. I can still smell the maple syrup if I let myself go back. I remember Mark at 13, sitting right where he was now, slouched in a football hoodie, his hair falling into his eyes as he scraped the last of the pancake syrup off his plate and begged his dad to throw the ball with him just 5 more minutes before school. Back then, the only paperwork on the table were permission slips and crumpled quizzes, and every bill lived in a neat stack under the magnet shaped like a strawberry on the fridge. My husband, Tom, would wink at me over the kids' heads and say, "We're rich in the important ways," and I believed him. Maybe you've had mornings like that too, when the house smells like coffee and toast and you think the hard times are finally behind you. We didn't have much, but we had that little house, and we had each other, and I never imagined that decades later my own child would sit in that same spot and ask me to move my pen over a line I couldn't quite read without my glasses. "What taxes?" I asked now, pushing my mug a little farther from the papers in case I accidentally splashed coffee on them. "I'm on a fixed income. I don't even file a complicated return. They send me that little booklet, I write in my numbers, and that's that. What would putting your name on the deed do for my taxes?" I said it lightly, like we were having an ordinary conversation. But I felt like someone had tipped my chair back and not told me when it would land. Mark sighed in that careful way that adult children do when they're trying to sound patient with an older parent. "Mom, it's just, listen, property tax is complicated. Jenna talked to a guy at work, and he said, if we put the house in my name now, we can set things up so it's easier later and you'll save money. It's just to help with taxes. You don't want to pay more than you have to, right?" He reached out, flipped the top page like he was flipping a magazine, not a legal document. My eyes followed his hand and caught a word that made my stomach tighten. quit claim. I might not be a lawyer, but I'd been Tom's unofficial bookkeeper for 35 years. I knew the difference between help with taxes and giving something away. I lifted my mug and took a slow sip, buying time. The coffee had gone lukewarm, but the warmth of the ceramic felt steady in my hand. That mug had been a Mother's Day gift when Mark was 8, bought with his allowance at the Hallmark store after he'd whispered to his sister not to tell Dad what he picked. I remember unwrapping it, the tissue paper crinkling between us, and Mark watching my face with a shy sort of hope you don't see in men's eyes very often. Back then, this little house was all we could afford after Tom's layoff, and we stood in the empty living room the day we closed, echoing footsteps on thin carpet, that mug in my hand, while Tom hung the key on a nail by the door and said, "Well, here's our castle queen." Now the mug was between me and my son like a witness. "Why is there a realtor's card attached?" I asked, peeling the business card off the top page where it had been stapled. "Jared something." The card was glossy, with a picture of a man in a too-tight suit and a too-bright smile. Mark waved a hand. "Oh, that's just a guy at church. He's been helping us look at some properties, that's all. He said if we ever want to downsize you—" He stopped, corrected himself. "If you ever want to downsize, he'd give us a good rate. It's nothing, Mom. Everyone uses realtors now. It's standard." "Downsize me," I repeated softly, setting the card back on the table. Another little click sounded in my head, like a puzzle piece finding a neighbor. If you're around my age, you've probably felt that weird mix of love and something else when your kids start talking about your house like it's an asset instead of a home. It creeps in slowly through jokes and questions. "You sure you don't want a condo closer to us? What would you even do if the furnace died?" Until one day you realize they've been looking at your front porch and seeing dollar signs where you still see Halloween pumpkins and prom pictures. "I appreciate you looking out for me," I said, because I did, or I wanted to. "But I don't sign anything without reading it. If it's just to help with taxes, it'll still be helpful next week, won't it?" Mark's jaw tightened. "Mom, you know I'm swamped this week. I rearranged my schedule to come here. The guy at work said we should get this filed before the end of the quarter. It's time sensitive. Why do you always have to make things difficult?" That stung. I'd been the problem solver my whole life, the one who stayed on hold with the insurance company, who packed the lunches, who figured out how to stretch a paycheck when Tom decided to help his brother just this once. To hear my own son say I was making things difficult because I wanted to read what I was signing. Well, maybe you've sat at a table like that yourself, trying not to let your face show too much. "Let me sleep on it," I said. "I'll take these to bed with me, have a good look, and we can talk this weekend." He stared at me for a long second, his fingers drumming once against the table. His phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, then back at me. "Fine," he said at last, standing up. "But don't go down some crazy internet rabbit hole and scare yourself, okay? This is standard. Jenna and I are just trying to help. We're not the enemy here." The word enemy lay between us like something sour. I didn't say anything. I just gathered the papers in both hands, careful not to bend them, and watched my son shrug on his coat in the hallway, where his muddy little sneakers used to live in a pile. When the door clicked shut behind him, the house felt unusually quiet, the way it does after a storm when you're not sure if it's really over. The refrigerator hummed, the clock over the stove ticked, and the blue mug sat on the table, the words across it catching the last of the light. World's best mom. I snorted softly, then picked it up and carried it with me into the living room, along with the stack of papers, like I needed its weight in my hand to keep from floating right off the ground. In the living room, I settled into Tom's old recliner, the one place in the house that still smelled faintly like his aftershave if I pressed my face against the fabric, and spread the documents on my lap. My reading glasses lived in a little bowl on the side table just behind the lamp that had been his mother's. I put them on, took a deep breath, and started to read. The more I read, the colder my coffee became and the tighter my chest felt. It wasn't just to help with taxes. It was transferring my interest in the property, my ownership, to Mark. There were phrases about consideration and grantor and grantee that sounded more like something out of a courtroom drama than the way you'd talk to your mother. There was no clause about my right to live here as long as I wished. No safety net. If I signed this, I would be giving my son this house, right now, fully. No takebacks. I set the papers down and rubbed my forehead. It's funny, at my age, how one piece of paper can suddenly make you see the last few years like a movie on fast forward. Little comments from Mark and Jenna clicked together in my mind. You don't really need 3 bedrooms, Mom. The stairs are going to get hard one day. Maybe it's better to think ahead. If we sold at the right time, you could have a nice nest egg and we could help manage it for you. Back then, I'd heard concern. Now, I wasn't sure what I heard. I looked around the living room, at the family photos on the mantel, at the little dent in the wall where a moved couch had bumped too hard, at the crocheted blanket my sister made draped over the back of the recliner. This room had seen first steps and flu fevers and Christmas mornings. I thought about the night Tom and I slept on the floor here the week we moved in, because we couldn't afford a bed frame yet, and we were too tired to build the second-hand one we'd found. I remembered waking up with sunlight in my face, Tom's arm thrown over me, and the smell of coffee wafting in from the kitchen where my mother, who'd come to help us unpack, was already up and moving. Get used to that smell, she'd teased. This is your life now. She had been right, in more ways than one. The next day, I took the papers to my friend Denise. She lives 3 houses down in a tidy little brick ranch with geraniums in pots on the porch, and she's 10 years younger than me, but she reads everything, especially when it comes to money. Denise is one of those people who actually understands those pamphlets that come with your 401k and circles things in the newspaper about Social Security. She's also the one who brought me soup when I had bronchitis and sat with me in the ER that time my blood pressure crashed. If you've got a Denise in your life, you know what a gift that is. Come in, Evelyn, she said when I showed up at her door late that morning, clutching my blue mug in one hand and the papers in the other. I hadn't meant to bring the mug, but I realized I was holding it when I got to her front walk, like a child with a security blanket, and I couldn't bring myself to put it back in the cupboard. I made a fresh pot, she added, stepping aside. Her kitchen smelled like cinnamon from the oatmeal she ate every morning, and the radio on her counter murmured soft oldies. I sat at her table and slid the paperwork over. Tell me if I'm being paranoid, I said. Mark says it's just to help with taxes. I tried to keep my voice light, but it wobbled. Denise adjusted her reading glasses and started scanning, her lips moving slightly as she read. The only sound for a moment was the whir of her ceiling fan. "How's little Lily?" I asked to fill the silence. "Good," Denise murmured, still reading. "She lost her first tooth. Hannah sent me a picture." She flipped to the second page, then the third, her brows drawing together. Finally, she set the packet down and looked at me. "Evelyn," she said, using the tone I'd heard her use on her kids when they were about to do something really ill-advised, "this is not just about taxes." The way she said it made my stomach drop, even though I'd already suspected as much. "What would happen if I signed it?" I asked. "You'd be giving Mark the house," she said plainly. "All of it. No life estate, no joint tenancy, no clauses about you being able to stay here. It's a straight transfer. There's nothing in here that protects you if you and Mark disagree later. I'm not saying he'd kick you out, but legally, he could. Or if he got sued or divorced or whatever, this house would be part of his assets, not yours." She paused, then added, "And this bit here, this says there's no money changing hands. He'd be getting a paid-off property for free." For free. The words rattled around in my head like a marble in a drawer. Tom and I had spent 30 years paying off this mortgage, scrimping on vacations and eating more casseroles than I care to remember. For free. Denise must have seen something on my face because her expression softened. "I know you love him," she said. "I'm not saying he's a monster, but this is serious. At the very least, you should talk to a lawyer before you sign anything." A lawyer? Of course. It was so obvious it was almost embarrassing that I hadn't thought of it. But there's something about being a mother, or maybe about being a widow, that makes you forget you're allowed to have professionals on your side too. You get used to just figuring things out on the fly, or trusting the people you raised. "Do you know a good one?" I asked. Denise nodded. "My sister used a woman downtown when she did her will. I'll text you her info. And Evelyn." She reached across the table and touched my hand, her fingers warm on my knuckles. "You're not crazy. If anyone handed me this and said sign, it's just to help with taxes, I'd show them the door." Maybe you've needed someone to say something that blunt to you, to cut through your excuses. I felt both ashamed and relieved, like someone had popped a balloon in my chest and let all the air out at once. I wrapped my hand tighter around my mug, feeling the ridges of the faded letters. "World's best mom. World's best—" What, fool? That night, I lay in bed, staring at the pink glow of my digital alarm clock. The house was dark and quiet, the kind of quiet that used to soothe me after a chaotic day, but now let my thoughts ricochet off the walls. I thought about Mark as a toddler, running down the hallway in his superhero pajamas, hollering, "Mom, watch me," as he jumped into a pile of pillows. I thought about him at 17, cheeks flushed, asking if he could borrow the car for a date, promising he'd be home by 11 and returning at 1 with a dented fender and a sheepish apology. I thought about the way he'd cried at his father's funeral, his shoulders shaking under my hands, and how I'd whispered, "We'll figure it out, you and me, okay?" Because I'd believed that our grief bound us, that we were on the same team. Then I thought about the last few years, about how "we" had slowly become "you" in his sentences. "You should really think about—" "You can't expect—" "You need to be realistic, Mom." And now this, a stack of papers that would make all my sacrifices into a line item on his balance sheet. I realized, as I stared at the ceiling that somewhere along the way I'd started believing my comfort was negotiable while his security was not. If you're a woman my age, you probably know what I mean. Sometime after 2 in the morning, I got up, padded down the hall to the kitchen, and turned on the light over the sink. The blue mug sat upside down on the dish rack, a little circle of dried water under it. I picked it up, turned it right side up, and set it on the counter. "Okay," I said softly, to no one and to everything. "Enough." The next day, I called the lawyer Denise had recommended. Her name was Maria Ortiz, and her receptionist sounded brisk but kind. "We actually had a cancellation for Thursday morning," she said. "Can you come in at 10?" Thursday morning, I put on my good gray slacks and the cream sweater Lily said made me look like a fancy grandma, and I tucked the paperwork into a manila envelope along with my current deed. The deed was folded carefully in a plastic sleeve, the paper yellowed a bit from age, but the ink still clear. Evelyn Grace Thompson and Thomas Michael Thompson as joint tenants with rights of survivorship. Underneath, a little stamped note from when Tom died showed the transfer into my name alone. The sight of my name there had once made me cry in the car outside the county office because it felt like proof that he was really gone. Now, it felt like armor. I slipped the envelope into my big purse. Then, at the last minute, I added my blue mug too, just like I had to Denise's. Don't ask me why. I told myself I needed something to drink in the car. But I knew it was more than that. That mug had been there when I was a young mother, when I became a widow, when I'd paid off the last of the mortgage. It was like a touchstone. Maria's office was on the second floor of a converted house downtown, the kind with creaky wooden floors and a bell that chimed softly when you opened the door. The waiting area smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and coffee. A row of chairs lined one wall, and legal books filled shelves on the other. Behind the reception desk was a framed photo of a smiling woman in a cap and gown, which I guessed was Maria's daughter. It struck me that even lawyers are someone's mom. Maria herself was in her late 40s, with dark hair pulled back and warm brown eyes. She shook my hand firmly and led me into her office, where a big window overlooked the street. I set my purse on the chair beside me and, without meaning to, placed my blue mug on the corner of her desk. It looked a little out of place among the neat stacks of legal pads and a small fern, but somehow right, too. "So," she said, settling into her chair and opening a legal pad. "Tell me what brings you in," I explained, feeling simultaneously foolish and angry as I talked. "My son says it's just to help with taxes," I finished, sliding the packet over to her. "But I wanted to make sure." Maria nodded, reading silently. Her pen moved occasionally, jotting notes. After a few minutes, she looked up. "I'm glad you came, Mrs. Thompson," she said, "because your instincts are correct. This is a quitclaim deed transferring your entire interest in the property to your son. There's no retained life estate, no trust language, nothing that protects your right to live there. And this part," she tapped a paragraph toward the bottom, "waives certain rights you might otherwise have if there were disputes. So if I signed it, I'd be—" I struggled to find a word that didn't make me sound dramatic. "You'd be giving your son a paid-off house," she said gently, echoing Denise, "and trusting that he would allow you to live there. That's not a position I'd advise anyone, especially a widow on a fixed income, to put themselves in, taxes or no taxes." Could there be a tax benefit? I asked, because despite everything I still wanted to give Mark the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he'd just been misinformed. Maria shrugged slightly. There are ways to do estate planning that consider taxes, yes. But there are safer structures, like putting the house in a trust that names him as a beneficiary after you pass, or a transfer on death designation, depending on your state. Even then, it should be done thoughtfully, not under pressure. This, she said, tapping the papers again, benefits him now and exposes you to risk. We could certainly design something better for you if you want to plan for the future. I exhaled a breath I felt like I'd been holding for a week. I'm not ready to give up my house, I said. Not to anyone, not yet. You don't have to, she replied, and you should never sign anything under pressure. May I ask, how did your son present this to you? He said, "Sign, Mom, it's just to help with taxes," I answered, my voice flat. Saying the words out loud in that office made them sound cheap. Maria's mouth quirked. "That's a lot of just for something this big," she said. We shared a small, rueful smile. "If you'd like, we can also put some protections in place so that no one can do things like this without your consent. For instance, we could file something indicating that any transfer of this property requires your notarized signature. It won't stop people from trying, but it adds a layer of complication." By the time I left Maria's office, my head was buzzing, but in a different way than when Mark had first pushed those papers at me. This buzzing had edges of clarity to it. In my purse, the manila envelope now held both the original deed and the unsigned quitclaim, along with a couple of brochures Maria had given me about trusts and transfer on death deeds. My blue mug was back in the cup holder of my car, half full of coffee gone cold. I picked it up and took a sip anyway, grimaced at the taste, and then laughed out loud in the empty car. It tasted awful, but at least it was my terrible coffee in my car outside my lawyer's office for my house. I knew I still had to talk to Mark. That conversation came sooner than I expected. That afternoon, as I was reheating some leftover chicken soup for lunch, my phone lit up with his name. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and answered. "Hi, honey." "Mom," he said, without the usual small talk. That tone, clipped and purposeful. "Did you look over the papers? We really need to move on this." I glanced at the blue mug on the counter next to the stove. The steam from the soup perfumed the air with garlic and thyme, a smell that always reminded me of Tom on sick days, bundled in a blanket on the couch with a box of tissues. "I did," I said. "I took them to a lawyer." There was a brief silence. Then, "A lawyer? Why would you do that?" "Mom, it's just to help with taxes," I finished quietly for him. "Yes, I know. That's why I wanted to make sure I understood what I'd be signing." His exhale crackled through the speaker. "And?" "And if I sign that, I give you the house," I said. "Now, completely. There's nothing in there that protects my right to live here. That doesn't feel like helping me." "Oh my God," he said, in that exasperated way I'd once heard him use with his kids when they refused to eat vegetables. "Did Denise put you up to this? I bet she filled your head with—" "Mark," I cut in, more sharply than I usually spoke to him. "Don't talk about Denise. This is between you and me. I'm not signing those papers." The line went very quiet. I could hear, faintly, a car door slam in the background, and a child's voice, probably my granddaughter, Ella, asking something. Then Mark came back, his voice lower. "You're being paranoid," he he said. "We were trying to take something off your plate." "My God, Mom, no wonder people say old folks are impossible. You can't even accept help." Old folks. The words hit me like a slap, partly because they came from the same mouth that had once said Mommy in a wobbly, feverish whisper when he needed me most. "I can accept help," I said slowly. "What I won't accept is signing away my security because someone tells me I'm making things difficult. If there's a tax benefit we can find that doesn't require me to give you my house, I'm open to hearing about it. But I'm not transferring the deed." "You have no idea how the world works," he snapped. "We're out here busting our butts, paying rent through the nose, while you sit in a big house that's paid off, and the one time—" He cut himself off, but I heard the rest anyway. "The one time we ask you for something." I swallowed, feeling both anger and an awful, creeping sadness. "I know exactly how this house got paid off," I said quietly. "Your father and I did that, over decades. I may not know everything about how the world works now, but I know how a quitclaim deed works, and I know just helping with taxes shouldn't require me to put myself in a position where I could be one argument away from being told to pack my things." "I would never do that," he protested, sounding hurt for the first time. "I hope that's true," I replied. "And if it is, then you shouldn't need this piece of paper to feel secure, should you?" There was a long pause. I could picture him, jaw tight, running a hand through his hair like he did when he was frustrated. "You're making a mistake," he said finally. "And when the tax bill comes and you can't handle it, don't expect us to swoop in and fix it." "I'm not asking you to swoop," I said. "I'm just asking you to respect that this house is not a problem to be solved. It's my home, and what happens to it after I'm gone will be decided when I'm ready, with proper advice." "Whatever," he muttered. "I have a meeting. We'll talk later." He hung up before I could say goodbye. I stared at the phone in my hand, the soup bubbling softly behind me. I felt shaky, but underneath that there was a strange, new steadiness, like my feet had just found the ground after standing in quicksand. I picked up my blue mug, poured myself fresh coffee, and sat at the kitchen table, letting the warmth seep into my palms. If you've ever drawn a line like that for the first time in a long while, you might recognize that mix of terror and relief. I thought that would be the end of it, but of course it wasn't. A few days later, Denise forwarded me a screenshot of a listing she'd seen in one of those neighborhood Facebook groups. "Isn't this your house?" she texted. My heart hammered as I opened it. There, unmistakably, was a photo of my front porch, my flower boxes, even the wind chime my niece gave me swaying by the door. The caption read, "Coming soon, charming 3-bedroom and quiet established neighborhood. Showings by appointment. Contact Jared F. at—" Underneath were comments from neighbors nitpicking the price, praising the school district, tagging friends who might be interested. I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. My house, listed, without my consent. I hadn't signed anything, but there it was, out in the world, as if it were already for sale. I called the realtor's number with fingers that shook. He answered on the second ring, his voice smooth and cheery. "Jared Franklin, Tri-County Realty. How can I help you?" "You can start," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "by explaining to me why my house is on Facebook with your name on it." There was a brief pause. "I'm sorry. Who is this?" "This is Evelyn Thompson," I said, "the owner of 214 Maple, the house you've listed as coming soon. I didn't hire you." "Oh," he said, and I could hear the click of recognition. Ms. Thompson, yes, hi. I've been working with your son, Mark. He told me he had the paperwork in motion to take title, and we could get a jump on the marketing, so we'd be ready when everything was finalized. It's standard to do a coming soon once the seller signs the listing agreement. Well, I haven't signed anything, I said. And Mark doesn't own this house. I do. I'm asking you to take that listing down. He hesitated just long enough to confirm every fear I'd had about being seen as an old woman who could be pushed around. Ms. Thompson, he said, switching to a more careful tone, I understand this might be, a bit of a miscommunication. Your son assured me. My son assured you of something that isn't true, I cut in, and I have the original deed to prove it. I'm happy to bring it to your office if that would clear things up. There's no need to. I'd like to, I said. This afternoon, if possible. 2:00. He must have heard something in my voice, because he didn't argue. 2:00 is fine, he said. I'll be here. After I hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a long moment, feeling my pulse in my throat. Then I went to the drawer where I kept important papers, a plain wooden drawer in the sideboard, nothing dramatic, and pulled out the manila envelope. I took out the original deed, still in its plastic sleeve, and held it in my hands. My name stared back at me from the page in black ink and official stamps. I slipped it back in the sleeve, then laid it carefully in my purse. On an impulse, I picked up my blue mug and added it too. It sounds silly, but I wanted it with me, like a friend in my corner. Maybe you have an object like that, something ordinary that suddenly becomes a kind of talisman. Jared's office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a pizza place, with big windows displaying pictures of happy couples holding sold signs. Inside, the air smelled like coffee and new carpet. A row of small desks with computers lined one wall, and a fake ficus tree sat in the corner. A young woman at the front desk looked up and smiled. "Hi, can I help you?" "I'm here to see Jared," I said. 2:00, Evelyn Thompson. "Of course," she said, standing. "Right this way." Jared was in a glass-walled office at the back, looking at something on his computer. He stood when I entered, flashing that too bright smile from his business card. He was probably mid-30s, with gelled hair and a tie a little too tight. "Ms. Thompson," he said, coming around the desk to shake my hand. "So nice to meet you in person. Please have a seat." I sat, placing my purse on the chair beside me. My heart was pounding, but I reminded myself I hadn't done anything wrong. I owned my house. I took a breath, then reached into my purse and pulled out the plastic sleeve with the deed, laying it on his desk. My hand brushed against the blue mug as I did, solid and familiar. I almost took it out too, but stopped myself, one battle at a time. "This," I said, tapping the page lightly, "is the original deed for 214 Maple. As you can see, it's in my name. I haven't sold it, transferred it, or signed anything to change that. So I'm wondering why it's being advertised as coming soon." Jared's smile faltered a little. He leaned over the document, and I watched his eyes flick from my name at the top to the recording stamps. His fingers traced the notary seal, the date, the notation showing transfer to me alone after my husband's death. The realization washed over his face slowly, like a tide coming in. This woman in front of him wasn't just some confused parent his client was helping. She was the legal owner. "Huh," he said, the charm dropping a notch. Your son told me, well, he said the house was essentially his, that you were just formalizing it. My son may have strong feelings about what happens to my house one day, I said evenly, but legally, it's mine, and until or unless I decide otherwise, it is not coming soon anywhere. He cleared his throat, glancing from the deed to me. Well, obviously, if there's a discrepancy, we can't proceed. I'll take the listing down. He clicked something on his computer, his jaw tight. I'm sorry for any confusion, Miss Thompson. We were just trying to get ahead of the game. Your game, I said quietly. He looked up, startled. Excuse me? You were trying to get ahead of your game, I repeated. My home isn't a game. It's where I live. It's where I plan to keep living. If anyone talks to you about it in the future, I'd appreciate it if you remembered whose name is on that deed. He nodded, a flush creeping up his neck. Of course, absolutely. I'll make a note in the file that any future discussions require your direct consent. I sat back a little, feeling a strange calm settle over me, watching his face as he realized the truth, that I had brought the original deed and that my name, not my son's, was on it, was like watching a curtain get pulled back on a little stage. Suddenly, all the stories Mark had likely told him about his poor, aging mother who needed his help with taxes didn't matter. The paper in front of him did. The system that so often feels stacked against older women, banks, courts, agencies, was, in this moment, on my side because the facts were. Thank you, I said, standing. I slipped the deed back into the sleeve, then into my purse. My hand brushed the mug again, and I thought, not for the first time, how many mornings it had sat on my kitchen table while I paid bills, signed permission slips, wrote checks for Mark's college tuition. It had been there for the sacrifices. Now it was here for the boundary. As I left the office, my phone buzzed. A text from Mark. Jared says you came to his office. WTH, Mom. I didn't answer right away. I drove home first, the late afternoon sun slanting orange over the familiar streets. At a red light, I glanced at the houses around me. Split levels, ranches, colonials, each one holding a story like mine, some invisible boundary being pushed or held. I wondered how many other mothers had signed something they didn't understand, because someone said it's just. Back home, I made myself a cup of tea in the blue mug, the way I do when I need to think. The steam curled up against my chin as I sat at the kitchen table and considered my reply to Mark. In the end, I called instead of texting. Some conversations, even painful ones, deserve a voice. He answered on the second ring, sounding keyed up. Why did you go to Jared's office? He demanded. You embarrassed me. I went because my house was on the internet without my consent, I said. I brought the original deed and watched the realtor's face when he saw whose name was on it. It wasn't yours, Mark. It's mine. I needed him to understand that. There was a heartbeat of silence. Then, you're blowing this way out of proportion. It was just a coming soon post. It's how things are done now. Things are done with the owner's permission, I said, not behind her back. We weren't behind your back, he protested. You knew we were talking about selling eventually. We're trying to get you somewhere safer, closer to us, and yes, free up some equity to help with taxes, I interrupted. With everything, he exploded. College funds for the kids, our own housing, your medical costs down the line. It makes sense, Mom. Why should you be sitting on that asset when it could be working for the whole family? There it was, not even hidden anymore. I took a slow breath, feeling the mug warm in my hands. "Because I paid for this house," I said. "Because I babysat in our living room to make the mortgage when your father got laid off. Because I went without new winter coats so we could keep the furnace running. Because I took on extra shifts at the grocery store when you wanted to play travel hockey." My voice trembled, but I didn't stop. "Because when your father died, I sat in a county office and signed the paperwork that put this house in my name, and I cried in the car afterward because it meant he was really gone. This house isn't just an asset, it's the place that held our life, and I will not be pushed out of it on a timetable that suits your finances." He was breathing hard on the other end. "You're being so selfish," he said. "I can't believe I'm saying that to my own mother, but it's true. You'd rather die alone in that house than let your family benefit." "I'd rather live on my own terms," I replied quietly. "If, when the time comes, I decide to sell or move or leave the house to you in my will, that will be my choice, not something I'm pressured into because you and a realtor are excited about the market." "You don't understand how hard it is out here," he shot back. "Rents, daycare, student loans. It's different than when you were starting out." I closed my eyes for a moment. "I believe you that it's hard," I said. "I really do. But my job is not to sacrifice my basic security so that you don't have to struggle at all. I helped you as much as I could when you were young. I'll continue to help, in ways that don't leave me vulnerable. That's the line." "This is unbelievable," he muttered. "Jenna's right. You're acting like a victim." "If I were a victim," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice, "I would have signed that paper without reading it. I didn't. That's the difference." He didn't know what to say to that. After a long pause, he said, "Fine, do whatever you want," and hung up. The days that followed were strange. On the surface, my life went on as usual. I went to my book club on Tuesday afternoons, where we gossiped more than we discussed the actual book. I volunteered at the church clothing drive on Saturdays, sorting bags of donated sweaters. I watered my spider plant and wiped down the kitchen counters and watched my detective shows at night with a blanket over my knees. But underneath, there was a new layer of, not anxiety, exactly, awareness. Mark's calls became less frequent, and when they did come, there was a stiffness to them. He'd ask how I was, update me on the grandkids' activities, and then trail off. I could hear Jenna in the background sometimes, her voice low and urgent, and I imagined their conversations when they hung up. Maybe you've imagined those conversations too, when you don't get to be in the room where your life is being discussed. One Sunday, after church, my granddaughter Lily bounded up to me in the fellowship hall, her blonde ponytail bouncing. "Grandma," she cried, flinging her arms around my waist. "Guess what? We might move into a house with a pool." I hugged her back, my heart aching. "Is that so?" "Yeah, Daddy says if things work out with your house, we can get one with a big backyard and a pool and a treehouse. He said we'd be helping you too, 'cause your stairs are hard." She said it with the guileless enthusiasm of an 8-year-old who just wants a pool. I smoothed her hair, feeling the dampness of sweat from the crowded church. "Sweetheart," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Grown-up stuff about houses can be complicated, but I promise you, wherever you live, I will come visit and we'll make it special, with or without a pool." Her face fell a little. "So we're not moving?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "That's up to Mommy and Daddy. But me and my house, we're staying put for now." She frowned, trying to puzzle that out, then got distracted by a friend calling her name and ran off. I watched her go, my blue mug sitting on the refreshment table nearby, full of lukewarm church coffee. I walked over and picked it up, sipping as I listened to the low murmur of adult conversations around me. I caught a snippet of Jenna's voice to someone. Well, we tried to help her, but she's stubborn, you know how they get. They. As if I were a category, not a person. A few weeks later, an unexpected envelope arrived in the mail from Maria's office. Inside was a copy of a new document we'd set up, a transfer on death designation, naming both my children as beneficiaries of the house, divided equally to take effect only after my death. There was also a letter summarizing our conversation, that I wanted to maintain full control and use of the property during my lifetime, that I understood alternatives, that this arrangement could be changed at my discretion. I read it through twice, then added it to the drawer with my important papers. This time, when I slid the drawer shut, I felt something settle inside me. It wasn't about punishing Mark or teaching him a lesson. It was about making sure that when the day came that I couldn't speak for myself, that day none of us liked to think about, the paper trail would. Life didn't magically become perfect after that. Mark stayed chilly for a while. He didn't bring up the house again, but the absence of its mention sat between us like a piece of furniture we'd both decided not to comment on. There were some strained holidays where a conversation stayed determinedly on safe topics. At Thanksgiving, he and Jenna offered to host, and I brought my famous green bean casserole to their rental townhouse, carrying it carefully in both hands while my blue mug rode empty in my purse, just in case they didn't have one that felt like it fit my hand. Then, one rainy Tuesday, a few months later, my doorbell rang. It was mid-morning, and I was in my robe, my hair still in curlers, stirring a pot of oatmeal. When I opened the door, Mark stood there alone, shoulders hunched against the drizzle, a cardboard tray with 2 coffee cups in his hand. He looked tired, older than 38, with deeper lines around his mouth. "Can I come in?" he asked. I hesitated, then stepped aside. Of course. He wiped his feet on the mat and came into the kitchen, setting the tray on the table. "I brought coffee," he said unnecessarily. "Thank you," I replied, reaching for my blue mug in the cupboard out of habit. I caught myself and instead took one of the paper cups. We both sat. The rain drummed softly on the roof. For a minute we talked about nothing, the weather, Lily's school project, Ella's latest obsession with dinosaurs. Then Mark cleared his throat. "Mom," he said, looking down at his hands, "I owe you an apology." I stayed very still. He stopped, corrected himself. "I got ahead of myself, with the house, with the taxes thing. It's just, our landlord raised the rent again, and Jenna's student loans kicked back in, and the kids need braces, and I felt like I was drowning. When the guy at work mentioned how his parents put the house in his name and it helped them all, I thought. I don't know what I thought. That maybe this could be our solution, too. I didn't think about how it would feel to you." I sipped my coffee, letting the warmth fill my mouth, buying time. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "I know things are hard for you. I never wanted to be another bill in your stack." "You're not a bill," he said quickly. "You're my mom, which is why I felt like I had the right to." He trailed off, wincing. That sounds bad when I say it out loud. "It sounds honest," I said gently. You felt like my house was part of your safety net." He nodded miserably. "Yeah, and when you pushed back, I panicked. That comment I made about old folks, I've regretted that 100 times. I sounded like one of those jerks on TV." "It hurt," I said simply, "but I'm glad you realized it." He looked up at me then, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I still think we need a plan for down the line," he said. "But it should be your plan, not mine. If you want me involved in those decisions, I'd be honored. If you don't, I'll respect that too." I thought about the letter in my drawer, the transfer on death deed already arranged, the trust Maria and I had started drafting for my modest savings. I thought about the blue mug sitting on the shelf above my sink, how it had been a vessel for so many small comforts and so many late-night worries. "I would like you involved," I said, "as long as you can promise me something." "Anything," he said. "That you'll see me as a person, not just a resource," I replied. "That you'll remember this house is my home, not just a solution." He nodded, tears spilling over now. "I can do that," he said. "I want to do that." He stayed for lunch, and I heated up leftover soup, while we talked more practically about his finances, about budgets and side gigs, and the possibility of them moving a little farther out of town to find cheaper rent. I didn't offer him the house. I did, however, offer to help them research options, and to contribute a bit toward the girls' braces from the small emergency fund I kept. Not because I felt obligated, but because I wanted to, and because it wouldn't leave me precarious. That distinction might sound subtle, but if you've ever given from a place of fear versus a place of choice, you know how different they feel. Months passed. Spring came, greening the trees along Maple Street, and then summer, with its long golden evenings. I sat on my porch many nights with my blue mug full of tea, listening to the cicadas and watching neighborhood kids ride their bikes. Sometimes Mark and the girls would stop by, the kids tumbling up the steps with their voices full of news. Sometimes they wouldn't, and the evening would be quiet, just me and the distant hum of traffic and the feel of the wood under my feet. I realized, slowly, that quiet did not automatically equal loneliness. Sometimes it equaled peace. Eventually Mark and Jenna did move, but not into a big house with a pool. They found a modest place on the other side of town with a decent yard and a cracked driveway. The girls were thrilled anyway. When I visited for the first time, I brought them a plant as a housewarming gift and my blue mug empty. "What's that for?" Lily asked. "For leaving here," I said, setting it on their kitchen shelf. "So, when I come over, I've got a little piece of home, and when I'm not here, you can use it and remember that your grandma learned some things about holding on and letting go." Jenna laughed awkwardly, but she didn't protest. Mark just looked at the mug, then at me, and nodded. I still live at 214 Maple. The stairs creak a bit more, and I take them slower, but they're mine to climb. The deed is still in my drawer, alongside the more recent papers Maria helped me put in place. When I open that drawer now, I don't just see documents. I see a map of choices I made with my eyes open. Sometimes, when I make my morning coffee and wrap my hands around my backup mug, the blue one now lives at Mark's, I think about that day at the realtor's office, about how small I felt walking in and how different I felt walking out, having watched the realtor's face when he saw whose name was on the deed. It wasn't about showing up my son or winning some argument. It was about reminding myself, in front of a stranger, that my life, my home, my security, had value that wasn't up for casual negotiation. Maybe you're listening to this and recognizing little pieces of your own story. Maybe your kids have started talking about your house like it's already theirs, or a sibling is nudging you to simplify things with your accounts, or someone at church is offering friendly advice that seems to benefit them more than you. I can't tell you exactly what to do. That's for you and, frankly, a good professional to figure out. But I can tell you this. You're allowed to ask questions. You're allowed to take papers to a lawyer. You're allowed to say, "I'll think about it," and mean it. And you're allowed to protect the roof over your own head, even from people you love, especially from people you love. These days, when I sit at my kitchen table with my coffee and the morning light slanting in, the table is a little more cluttered. Grandkids' drawings, seed catalogs, the crossword puzzle I never quite finish. But there's also room for something else, my sense that I deserve to be safe. Not pampered, not worshipped, just safe. That's not selfish. That's the baseline. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you, truly, from my heart. It means a lot to an old lady like me, sitting here with her coffee, to know someone out there is listening. If you like this story, I'd love to hear where you're listening from. What city, what little corner of the world is your kitchen table in? Come tell me in the comments so we can keep each other company. If you enjoy these life stories and you'd like to help me keep sharing them, you can support the channel with a little super thanks here on YouTube. That tiny button does more than you'd think. On your screen, you should see a couple more stories I recommend if you'd like to stay a while longer. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next story from my messy, ordinary, precious life. Until we talk again, be gentle with yourselves and remember, your home and your heart are worth protecting.